With calisthenics, there's such a mismatch between what we actually do and what the science says. We know elite athletes that are doing literally hundreds of sets a week for an exercise targeting a muscle, when the science says on average 10 to 20 sets is going to be great for most people as a basis. What's with the discrepancy between calisthenics versus weights?
I think it's a bit of an unanswered question. And I think we don't really know what the true answer is for the upper limit of volume. So you do have some studies showing that more volume tends to be better. You reach a point where more volume tends to give diminishing returns. And then at a certain point, we kind of see it's detrimental, like you're training too much. But you have a lot of studies that are showing more training is better, and more volume tends to just yield superior results. And then you get variation within those studies as well. So it's not like every individual, like on average, more volume is better, but you get some people who respond better to low volume, some people who respond better to high volume. On average, the best athletes train with higher volumes than the research would recommend. So they're just doing a lot more work. I think the skill component of calisthenics comes into that. So you have higher volumes would yield better effects with calisthenics, just because you're training more frequently and there's a higher neurological component to a lot of the exercises. There's a lot more of a skill component. So like a handstand push-up is going to take longer to master than a squat. And a lot of the exercises that are studied in the literature tend to be, more stable, easier exercises like a squat or even like machine weights. Yeah, I think on average, I would rather tell people to train harder rather than less. Like if someone says, hey, 30 sets is feeling pretty good, can I bump it up? I'd probably say, yeah, try it, see what happens. But yeah, it's very hard to say what the perfect thing is for each person.
Especially if someone's doing predominantly calisthenics, bodyweight movements, I'd argue that the fatigue per set is a lot less than doing a weighted exercise, given the ability to actually get towards failure. With these calisthenics skills, there's a lot of movement, balance, body coordination, and true muscular failure isn't often the actual limiting factor. So there's that somewhat inverse relationship between that lower relative intensity because you're doing it with your body weight versus external loads. And I'd say that it just allows you to do just more and more sets of that.
Yeah, agreed. Definitely agreed. I think that's especially true for intermediates.
And it comes to the factor of height and weight being an influence here too, because when I compare how much I need to do being 6 foot, 85 kilos compared to a 5 foot gymnast that's 65 kilos, doing the same exercises, it's just going to be accruing more fatigue. There's a point of diminishing returns for this quote unquote junk volume. What does that actually look like, and how can we tell when we're getting into that territory of junk volume?
So junk volume is just adding more sets without getting a benefit to it. It's very hard to know when you're getting into this kind of realm of junk volume. But what I tend to find is if you're doing high quality practice, if you're getting stronger, I wouldn't change anything. The way I like to think of it is volume will influence the magnitude of changes that you get. So you do 1 set a week, you get some changes. You do 2 sets of that a week, you get more changes. You do 3 sets of that, you get more changes. And at a certain point it plateaus, and then it might even hinder progress thereafter. You're not really trying to hit this perfect optimal zone. You're not trying to hit that peak. You're just trying to hit somewhere that's effective, somewhere that's going to give you progress. So what I would do is I would just start with the generic recommendations. And I tend to push that a little bit higher, like 10 to 30 sets per muscle group per week. For calisthenics, to make that simple, just think of it as like 10 to 30 sets of push, 10 to 30 sets of pull per week. Just start there. If you're a beginner, you can probably get away with really low volumes, like 10, and see how you go. And if you're progressing well, great, keep doing what you're doing. If you're progressing well and you feel like you can tolerate more, I feel fresh, it feels easy, I want to do more volume, I feel like I can train more and train harder, there's some left in the tank at the end of each session, add more volume and see if you progress a little bit faster, slower, or you enjoy it more. If you are doing a lot of volume, you always feel run down, your training kind of sucks, you just feel fatigued, and you don't have any motivation, try and reduce that volume. So volume's something that it's very hard to hit the sweet spot. It's going to be dependent on other things like failure. So junk volume is basically adding on more training without giving you a beneficial effect. It's very hard to know when you are doing junk volume. But as a general rule, if you're making progress, nothing needs to change. If you're feeling good, you can try and just titrate that up a little bit. If you're feeling bad, overtrained, joints hurt, bring it down a little bit. You can also just adjust the proximity to failure. Just keep your training the same and just stop 2 reps further from failure. See how that feels.
Especially with volume as it relates to just purely sets, keeping that relatively constant is a great way of simplification and keeping yourself accountable. Because I find a temptation that I have, just say I'm trying to progress over 8 weeks, adding more sets towards the end has an influence on my intensity, and it's hard to understand and know if I'm actually progressing. And I find that by adding more sets, my intensity across the board tends to diminish because, oh no, now I've got to do 5 sets instead of 3. And it just is like a get out of jail card for actually doing the work. So I find that most people as well, if they can just not have any wiggle room with the set and just try a phase where you're just increasing pure intensity, the progression, the weight used within the rep range or hold time that you've given to yourself, the linear progress that you'll make will be so much easier to see and understand. And you'll have more sessions where you're like, I'm going to improve on my previous effort, as opposed to doing a 4th set, but then I have to drop the whole time or the reps, and it's like it gets very complicated extending it out as it relates to volume.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. The one time I think adding more volume just tends to really help is with skill stuff.
That's the difference. Yep. But for your generic like strength training, muscle building stuff, it allows it to be a lot more simplified. But give yourself that freedom to auto-regulate how many sets you do with strength skills for sure.
Yeah, and get your training in order first. Like if you're not training hard, that would be the thing I would change. Like a lot of people think about the number of sets and they're not training hard. They're not putting in effort. They're not trying to progress. They're not doing something challenging. If you are just challenging yourself frequently, consistently over time, you should get better.
Yeah, and I've noticed the less exercises per session, the more effort people can put into what they're actually doing. You get someone doing, say, 3 compound exercises for pushing compared to someone that has to do 5 or 6. The tenacity that you can put into 3 exercises versus 6 exercises is completely night and day. And it teaches that effort because it's not such an overwhelming thing. Oh, I've got this massive 1.5, 2 hour workout. No, I've got these 3 exercises and I'm going to give it my all and keep progressing.
Yeah. Yep, definitely.
If you enjoyed that, click here for the full fitness FAQs video. Peace.